So what's with that one arm drill, if we're talking about the batting thing off the tee there, we're not really worried about the lower half of the body.
Nope.
Is some sort of, you have to get some basics right there though, like how do they know what a real swing is if their feet aren't moving or their hips aren't moving?
Because when they naturally get two hands on the bat, they will have way more control. It'll be more like their normal swing. What we're just trying to teach them, it's as simple as this. It's just purely about controlling the barrel. Learning how to take the barrel from here down to there. And it's, go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, I think what Tom was sort of asking is, I guess, we talk about the swing part, right? Correct me wrong, we talk about the swing part, but at what point, I guess, do we start talking about, I guess, the lower half of the swing and refining the lower half?
Because if you're going to practice all day,
what you're sort of getting to?
Yeah, if you're practicing all day with the one hand and nothing's moving down there, aren't you practicing a bad mechanics that you're ingraining that into your muscle memory rather than having it all moving the right way?
Because we'll still be practicing hitting with two hands when all of that stuff will happen. So what we're actually doing is practicing, we're practicing a wider variety of skills and allowing the individual to work out the details themselves. So we give them the intent. The intent of the one-hand drill is to just meet the ball in a way that produces the angle and rotation. The intent of two-hand drill is generally largely the same, to produce angle and rotation with two hands, and we let the individual worry about that stuff themselves. If they practice it, generally they will have those movements in a reasonable way. If they're not exactly right, you can still manipulate them a little bit, you can still help them along, but our general philosophy with the whole group, and we'll talk about this more once Watto gets to the hitting development program, but we don't need to spend a lot of time. A lot of guys will find their own way there. The only time you need to step in...
When you say there, how do they know where there is unless you actually say this way?
But, you know, we've had, and I've spoken about a couple of players that I reckon they've done that drill so much that their back heel's just been nailed to the floor, and I reckon it has crept into their swing. And I hear what you're saying with this intrinsic learning and that, and I agree with that. But I just think, and then with that drill, you know, what you're saying is 100% of their concentration is just getting that bat head right. I reckon you need 3%.
Yeah, and with those, but what I'm saying is...
Make sure you stay loose with your bottom side and just let it loose. You know?
But what I'm saying is, the majority of kids will find their way there on their own. You don't need to tell them that. The guys that can't, you need to help them.
Yeah, I'm only talking about the guys that you see are just not doing it.
Yep, and that's exactly right. And again, this hitting philosophy does not suggest at any time that you cannot give someone an explicit instruction. It doesn't say that you absolutely cannot. It just suggests our general philosophy is try and stick to the intent of the movement and allow them to get there on their own. After lots of repetition, after changing their intent, and we'll talk about changing their intent and changing the movement to try and achieve that without them being conscious of it, again, without them being extrinsic about them learning that movement, right? Doing it at a subconscious level. If we can change the intent so that they achieve that movement, then they don't have to be distracted by it and have to concentrate on it. So what I'm saying is we try and get them there without specifically drawing attention to it. If they can't get there on their own, we might then help them adjust, lead them there with some questioning or show them some video footage or some of that sort of stuff.
I suppose my point also goes back to, if we're all just, you know, coaching club teams, you've got them once a week. How long do you wait for them to find it before the season's over? Like going them once a week for half a season?
Well, my question to you would be, is that the limiting factor that's helping that kid have success?
Well, I think if you look at all these good hitters that you've got pictures of here, at that point of contact, they've all got, everything's exactly the same. So if this kid hasn't got that, at what point do you say, listen, you've got to look like this when you hit the ball and that back foot is stuck on the ground?
Yeah, I would say with a lot of hitters, there's a large part of things that are consistent. There's also a lot of variation. So I would say it's not necessarily just because they have to do it that way that this is a limiting factor for them. What?
The guy that has his back foot on the ground, it's a big leaguer. I mean, he's a big leaguer, so
yeah,
he can do what he likes when he gets there. But
yeah,
to get there, you've got to follow some basic fundamentals. It would be make sure you get that hips around there and give yourself a bit more power. And you've only got one session a week. You know, it might be training is fielding and throwing and warming up and sprinting, and then you've got
Yeah.
like over half an hour to
Well,
get some hits.
yeah. Well, let's get to the hitting development model and go through that in more detail first, and we'll give you some options to try first, and then if and when they don't work, then you might most definitely be able to go there.
Sorry, if I can hold it for a second. 10,000 hours is 10 years, right? But it's basically 20 hours a week. And it's not 20 hours a week of us giving them instructions, 20 hours a week of the kid working on the skill set. So they're going to get their work in at home just as much as we've got to help.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll.
Too much in one.
No, that's right.
I'll mention that later as well, yeah.
Yeah, but perfectly legitimate point, and I totally agree. But I would say within our hitting development model, there is most definitely room for that. Again, these are things that you will take with individuals who aren't able to adjust on their own. You're going to have to find a way to lead them there. And it might come down to, if you've tried everything you've got in your little toolbox of skills, if you can't find a way to get it done. Sorry, I just conked out my. If you can't find any other way, you just have to go direct to it and say, look, what I would personally do is give them some video footage so that they can actually see it themselves. What do you see that's wrong with this picture? Have them make that connection themselves. Sorry. All right. All right, so everyone's pretty clear on intrinsic versus extrinsic learning. All right, it's in the Level 4 manual. You can refer back to it if and when you need to. What about implicit versus explicit instructions? We've just touched on a little bit here, Tomo. What do you reckon implicit instructions are?
Basic outline of an instruction.
Yeah, it's basically a generic description of what you want them to do without being totally explicit, totally specific or descriptive. So one of the, I suppose, easy example that if you're thinking about a swimmer who's doing a tumble turn and they push off the wall and they want to think of themselves like an arrow springing off and getting to a really long position as they drive off the wall. That's a generic sort of description of the overall movement described as a whole that they want to get to, rather than saying, I want you to extend your knees, extend your ankles, extend your hips all at the same time, reach out with your arms and push your fingers as far as you can. All right, the two descriptions are very different. One of them is much simpler for particularly young kids to accept and to visualize than the other. Does that make sense? So an implicit instruction is something that's very generic. It talks about the movement as a whole rather than the components of that movement, as opposed to something that's explicit, which is very specific and relates to usually a body part, but it relates to a specific component of that movement. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about the kinetic chain. So in a throw, for instance, it's about transferring energy from our feet through our hips, through our trunk, through our shoulders, to my arm, to my wrist. Right? That's a kinetic chain, one link followed by the other. All right? If we're talking about an explicit instruction, we might be talking about the front hip. During that complicated movement, I want you to just get that front hip right in the right way and do that. It's a pretty complicated process, particularly for a young athlete to go through. So again, where possible, if we can be a bit more general, a bit more descriptive as opposed to explicit, particularly for younger athletes, this will really help them understand what you're trying to get them to do. All right, so just be conscious of that as well. What's outcome-based learning, Maddie?
Easiest example is the target team. That's
Yeah.
the target.
Yeah, so you give them the outcome. What do we want to get to? You work out the details yourself and try and get there. All right, so as opposed to a more traditional coaching style where you would describe in detail the swing you want to take to achieve the outcome. All right, an outcome-based learning approach is kind of the other way around, working from the end result and working your way back. All right, so our hitting philosophy and our pitching philosophy, a little bit, there's a fair amount of outcome-based learning stuff in there, and it's about start from the end result. So what do we want to achieve? We want to achieve a line drive to centre field, right? If you do that consistently, and if we reinforce them positively when they do it right, we'll develop consistency in that, and that in turn, by reinforcing the line drive with backspin, we're actually reinforcing the movement that is most likely to create that. guys understand what I mean by that? As opposed to producing or trying to create a swing that will hopefully eventually produce a line drive with backspin. We go the other way. Give them the outcome. We just want to hit a line drive with backspin. You work out the details yourself. Make sense? I guess one of the reasons this has become, a more used, I suppose, method these days when they talk about, psychology stuff like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Human beings have basic needs. Part of those needs that they have is self-actualization or choosing their own path. Again, we talk about the video game theory. Why are kids so addicted to video games? Because are they so good at them, and do they love doing them because mum and dad sit over their shoulder and say, "You got to push that button now. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to fight that guy. Get that guy there. You got to get him. You got to go in here." We don't sit over their shoulder and coach them through their video games. We just let them go. They explore. When they bomb out, they try again. They keep going until they find a way to get it done, and they progress to the next level. Once they get to the next level, they get rewarded. They feel good about themselves. They can continue to work at it. So this outcome-based learning allows them to find their own way, but still get to the result. And as coaches, we can reinforce it, and we can help them with that by positively reinforcing the positive outcome or the positive execution of the skill.
Just with that, the outcome-based learning, I know Matty brought up the target too, because it's quite an easy one we always keep on referring to. I guess with the guys within the QBBA system, or even if you're familiar with, I guess, one of the things within the Rams or the Bandits program now, in regards to the throw program, I guess, at the end of each throw program, pretty much what do we run within the QBBA or the Bandits?
20 quick hands.
Sorry?
20 quick hands.
Yeah, 20 quick hands, so the 20 throws concept. So, you're not going to progress until everyone gets 20 throws. So, we're not really teaching them mechanics in regards to releasing or getting the ball out of the glove. It's just complete 20 throws as quick as you can, and then we can move on. So it's more outcome-based as opposed to teaching them the finer mechanics of catching it, the transition, pulling the ball out of the glove, and then moving their feet. It's just get it done type concept. So, and to sort of flip it back, and I'll touch on it again briefly with the hitting stuff. It's sort of the same with the hitting sort of concept. Just work out a way to get it done. Because, it's really just all outcome based. The whole 20 throw, you can't progress unless you get it done really. So that's just more an incentive.
And you can, if they don't get it done, if they don't find their way there on their own, you can help them. You can give them a bit more instruction on, how to get behind the ball, move your feet, get behind it, transfer the ball, come through it, make sure your body's going in that direction. You can give them that information if they don't get there on their own. But from the starting point, we give them the opportunity to try it and see how they go and see if they can find their own way there on their own. Make sense?